Hi, welcome back to the Real-Time Communication Show here in New York City. I'm here with Jon VonTetzchner from Vivaldi Technologies. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Rich.
John, you go back to one of the oldest browsers in the industry, the Opera browser. I mean, people are out there who were around the internet in its inception. Everybody knew what the Opera browser. Tell us about the history of the Opera browser when it got started.
Sure. I mean, we can actually take this all the way back to 1992. Where I was working at the Norwegian telco, the research lab, and we were discovering the web. And we started working with the web in 92. And just in comparison, at the end of 93, there were supposedly like 100 web servers in the world. So we were very, very, very early. And in 94, we decided to start working on the browser.
Now, where was Norway in terms of what was happening in the U.S.? Were things happening in parallel, or did things happen here in the U.S. first and then other countries started adopting?
Well, I mean, the web was invented in Switzerland. So when I was saying 100 web servers, I was saying 100 web servers worldwide. We had the entry point to Norway. We had the kind of the page you would go to visit the Norwegian site. And Norway is very, very, very early. We discovered this way before almost anyone else.
Okay, great. Now, and then you started working on the Opera browser. Tell us a little bit about the history of that browser and your contribution.
Yeah, I mean, so at the research lab, we started working on the browser, actually, two of us. And this is in the spring of 94. And there was not much other browsers at the time. We started working on the browser, and a year later, or should we say 6 months later, we had a prototype. And then there was a discussion with Telenor about what do we do with this, and we negotiated a deal with Telenor to take the browser out of Telenor and found our own company, Opera Software, in 95. So there was two of us, and I was the CEO.
Okay. And then how long did that development continue with the Opera? What happened over the next 5 years with that browser?
Well, I mean, we continued to work on the browser and getting it out there. We put it out on the internet in about 96 for download, and we gradually increased our user base. I mean, if you look at the time, there was a lot of browsers actually when we started. Great companies like IBM, Oracle, Symantec, Apple, they were all making browsers and all gave up. But we were just building our browser, gradually gaining momentum in the desktop space, and then starting to look at all the devices.
John, how many people were using the browser back in the early 90s?
I mean, we didn't have, I don't really have the number accurately, but it was not a lot of people, but we were gradually growing. And we actually had some really nice press at the time. We had a very nice article in the New York Times, for example, that gave us a lot of press. And so people were finding us. You have to remember, there was this tough competition between Netscape and Microsoft. There was a battle going on. And we were the little guys that in some ways not a lot of people noticed, but the people that were really interested, they found us.
So we were here at the show here in New York City at the Real-Time Communication Show, and also another segment called DevCon 5. Where are you taking the browser with Vivaldi Technologies?
So in some ways, I mean, I guess I should continue a little bit of the story with Opera, because Vivaldi is a natural continuation of what happened at Opera. So after those 5 first years, we continued to grow, and we went into mobile, and we became the #1 mobile browser in the world, and we became had a significant user base, right? And we took the company public, and we did all the normal things that you do. But in 2010, I stepped down as CEO. And I was thinking, okay, I'm not going to be doing browsers anymore. This is it. I'm not going to be doing browsers anymore. Not because I didn't want to, but because building a browser from scratch is just too difficult. There's something there, right? So a couple of years later, after I quit in 2013, there was a decision by Opera to move into a different direction, throw away actually 19 years of work, and restart, also with a different design philosophy. It's a design philosophy that basically is the same as most others, about simplification, making a browser that's very simple to use and is optimized for some kind of majority. We have always had a different approach at Opera, and that's what we are continuing with Vivaldi, meaning that we think users are different. Everyone is unique, and that with a tool that you use as much as a browser, you deserve to have those features that you want and let the browser work in the style that you want. So we're taking a totally different approach to the other mainstream browsers.
Now, what type of features do you think you're going to be doing with your browser that really aren't available in some of the other major browsers like Chrome or Firefox or IE?
Well, I mean, basically, it's out of the box. You notice a big difference. One of the things that you notice, obviously, is the browser is a lot more colorful. Now, that's a visual thing, but it's showing where we're going, and then you can customize the browser. You can start to decide how it looks, where you place things like the tabs. So, when people are using a browser a lot and they have different screens and different preferences, this is something that they have an opinion on. So if you just look at what we've done with tabs, you can place them on the left, on the right, top or bottom, or you can hide them. If you have a lot of tabs, we introduce something called tab stacking, which allows you to have multiple tabs on top of each other, which kind of cleans up and puts a hierarchy of your tabs, makes it easier to find them. It's very easy to undelete tabs, and by default, you continue where you left off. So there's a lot of details there. Another thing that we've done, which is different, if you have a tab stack, and you have multiple, if you have a tab stack with a few tabs, you can actually show them side by side, which makes a lot of sense if you're lucky enough to have one of these nice 4K or 5K screens, because the browser doesn't really utilize that screen in any meaningful way normally, or a web page. A web page is typically 1200 pixels, 1400 pixels wide or something like that, but if you have 4K pixels, it's better to have 3 pages side by side.
Okay, in terms of resources, I know as you add more tabs, you have to deal with taking more resources. Then people tend to line up a lot of tabs and take more resources. Is there anything you're doing with the browser to deal with the resource issue with browsers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do, when you start the browser, it only starts the tabs that you're actually using. All the tabs come up, but only the ones that you're using are actually active. And then you have the capability to put them to sleep. So by doing that, you can put any of your background tabs to sleep, saving up resources. So it's a way to deal with having a lot of tabs, most of which you're probably not working with at the same time.
Now, another thing that's happened with browsers in the last decade is multimedia, the move over to HTML5. What's your take on the direction of multimedia apps in the browser?
Well, I mean, this is something that we engage with quite heavily at Opera. I'm very proud of the fact that a lot of our people were engaged in writing those standards. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Gradually, you've been changing what the browser can do, so the browser can actually be used for running applications. And so it makes a lot of sense that you would have a browser that can actually do almost anything. And the principle that you would write the code once and it would run everywhere, and that's the principle of the browser.
Well, Jon, sounds like you're doing some pretty cool stuff with the tabbing features in your browser. What are some of the other things you're doing, and your general philosophy about what you're trying to achieve with your user?
Yeah. What we're going for, really, is you download the browser. And a lot of people, they look at the browser, it's more colorful, it's beautiful, it looks fresh. And that's kind of what we're going for, the initial approach. We want you to like it out of the box. But then what we are seeing is when people start to experiment with the features, when they start to turn a few settings here and there, and gradually the impression that the browser actually was made for you. And we're seeing people having that feeling. It's almost like it's a pure feeling. You find, okay, how did they think about this detail? How did they understand that this is what I wanted? And all of that is based on that we see individuals. We're not looking at how people are using the browser and saying, okay, we only do what 80% of the people want. We're looking at individuals and we're looking at what you want, and we're putting in options and choices for you so you can get the browser to look and feel exactly how you want it to.
Right. Now let's talk about a couple subjects that everybody's thinking about, and that's tracking and privacy and security.
Well, starting there, obviously, we don't. I mean, that's the most important thing that we do is not track you. And part of that was actually the decision, we do not want to know how you're using the browser. We are going that far. Everyone else that's building software now is sending back information about your browser usage or your usage of the software to learn to be able to add features or remove features. We are thinking, we can get the feedback from you. You tell us what you like. We can use that information directly from you, and we'll build a great browser for you. So we are not tracking, and we'll do whatever we can to keep you safe.
Now, you have some other things you think about in terms of your philosophy. Tell us about it.
A lot of it is focusing on the user and understanding that we are all unique in our approach to software. I mean, we don't all have the same cars. We don't all have the same clothes. We are individuals. And from that perspective, we believe we should adapt to you. So how do you want to use the browser? Do you prefer to click on things? Do you use mouse gestures to perform actions? Do you want to use keyboard shortcuts? Do you want to use the command line? We have something called Quick Command. Do you want a browser with a lot of buttons and a huge user interface? Or do you want it all to disappear and only show the tabs when you switch? It's all about individual approach. And given the amount of time a lot of us spend with the browser, I think that's a natural thing to do.
Jon, we're here at the Real-Time Communications Show, and one of the newer technologies that's starting to come into play, they say it's experimental, but you're starting to see more and more of it, and that's web real-time communications, and that's communicating with your browser. What is your take on that, and where's Vivaldi's position on where you're going with WebRTC?
In a lot of ways, we go all the way back to what we are doing at Opera. We're looking at Opera, we were working with a technology called Opera Unite from 2005 to 2010. It was kind of killed when I left the company. The thinking there was that we would have applications that you could download to the browser that serve things from the browser. So the browser was both a client and a server utilizing the same code. Things have evolved in this direction with Node.js and the like, but I think there's a lot more coming. So the idea that the browser is something you can use to communicate directly just makes a lot of sense, and obviously we will follow in that direction also with Vivaldi.
Right. Well, it always starts with getting people out there on the internet to start using your browser. So where do people go to download and start using Vivaldi?
The best thing is to go to vivaldi.com. You could download it for free.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I want to thank you for joining us here on eTech TV on our show, and keep us in tune as to what's going on in the future.
Rich, it's been a great pleasure.